outstanding debt. An outstanding debt. So let me start by saying this. Every one of us here is in debt. And I'm not talking about financial debt. Every one of us in here is in debt to. And you might say, well, what, pray tell, am I in debt to my neighbor for? It's to love them. You're in debt to your neighbor to love them the same way that you love yourself. It is a constant, permanent debt that is always to be paid on and yet never paid off. In other words, there will never be a time you are free from the obligation to love your neighbor as yourself. Mark chapter 12 comes to mind. Jesus summarizes the law. Or if you want to say downsizes it to 2, but Mark chapter 12. I'll just pick it up in verse 30. Jesus is speaking to the scribes here about the commandments. He says, in speaking about God, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. This is the first commandment. And the second, like it, is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. When you read that, I think most of us probably would say, I think I'll stick with number 1, that being loving God. Because God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. God is loving, God is kind, God is just, God is wise, God is gracious, God is patient. But my neighbor, that's a different bag. Because our neighbors, while some are friendly and likable and kind, it's not always the case with all of our neighbors. Some are unstable and vacillating. Some are needy, messy, whiny. Some complain all the time. Some drink a lot. Some curse. Some swear. Some don't vote the same way that I vote. Don't support the same movements and issues and ideologies that I do. Some of them drive Teslas. And some of them have license plates, goofy license plates that have all of the different religious symbols that say coexist, like they're all the same. Some of my neighbors' lives are full of constant drama, domestic unrest. And when I say domestic unrest, I mean that the police show up from time to time to square things away. Some are always smoking, and it's not cigarettes, it's the happy weed. Others talk about Buddha. Some rarely mow their grass, and some of them don't respect the property line. One could say that my neighbors may well drive me nuts. But I get the feeling, Pastor, you're going to tell me that I need to do something in regards to those neighbors. Yes. You need to love those neighbors. And let me qualify that. Not only are you to love your neighbor, you are to love your neighbor like you love yourself. So, in an effort then to circumvent the commandment, what do we do with our neighbors? We isolate, right? We build fences. We pull the blinds. We post the signs, keep off, no trespassing, private property. And of course, we justify all of that because we say, well, I'm not really trying to ignore my neighbor. It's the J-dubs that show up once in a while, the Mormons, and salesmen. But really, how often do they show up? Nah, not very often. It's really about the neighbors. We no longer answer the door, especially the front door. That's almost taboo. Everybody's moved to the back. We don't answer front doors much anymore. We only go out when they go in, and we come in when they go out. And if they happen to be out at the same time that we're out, don't make eye contact. And whatever you do, don't wave. Because if you wave, somebody's coming over and they're going to talk for a while. We purposely ignore our neighbors. And the ones that we have determined we just don't like, we really ignore those neighbors. And I think to myself, but do we purposely ignore ourselves? No, of course not. Because I'm in love with myself. Yeah, we are. And we are then to love our neighbors the same way that we like ourselves. Love ourselves. So sometimes this is what we do. We say, well, Pastor, I've got example A, B, and C to give to you of me doing exactly what the scriptures are telling me. You tell me to love my neighbors, well, I'll just give you my neighbor, and she can tell you glowingly how much I do for them and how much I love them. Good for you. But the Bible doesn't tell me here that I am to just love my neighbor as myself, to only the ones that are likable and good and nice. It's a broad term, all comprehensive, right? Even the ones that aren't friendly, even the ones that aren't likable, you have to love like yourself. Now you might say, what does that look like? Well, how much do you love yourself? The Bible says that innately we love ourselves, and honestly, much too much to be exact. The things that are done in life are done for our comforts, our profits, our security. They're done for our provisions and our well-being and good, both physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. In other words, everything that is carried on in life, generally speaking, is attesting to the love that we have for ourselves. I would like to say that the only one that we love more than ourselves is God, but sometimes God gets in the way of that. So whatever love you have for yourself, overlay that then in regards to your neighbor, okay? So when you start taking stock of just how do I love myself, how is that actually demonstrated? And you start thinking about it, that's the way then you are to love your neighbor, the likable and the unlikable, okay? I didn't say it was easy. When the lawyer or the expert in the law came to Jesus and he asked the question, he's under the mindset, obviously, when you read through that if you're not like me, I'm not responsible to have to show you love, right? If you're not the same ethnicity as me, if you're a Samaritan, then the whole love your neighbor as yourself is out. I don't have to do that, right? And so what's the illustration Jesus gives? It's the Samaritan who actually demonstrated neighborliness, right? To the Jew, obviously, who got beaten up. And the other two Jews just passed by him. So this is the challenge. Sometimes we look upon others not being like us, not having the same values, not having the same ideologies, not voting the same way, not having the same color of skin, not having the same social caste or financial background. and it's hands-off, ignore, and we want really nothing to do with them. Jesus is trying to help us to understand, look, you got to love your neighbors as yourself. You can't just go around ignoring everybody. Now, if you're to love your neighbor as yourself, what does that require of you? What does that require of me? I have to get to know my neighbors. So you can't get away from this. We would like to, but we can't. If I'm to love my neighbor like myself, I have to get to know my neighbors. I mean, truly get to know my neighbors. And some you're not really going to want to get to know. I understand that. I get that. But that doesn't get us out of this. We still have to get to know our neighbors. And not only just get to know my neighbors, what else does it require of me? To invest my time then in my neighbors, if I am to love them like myself. I come from a long line of talkers. You know, my wife says I'm just like my dad. Talk, 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 talk. And she's probably right. But the reality is, good or bad, the example was set for me that here's a man who really never met a stranger. Here's a man who knew his neighbors, right, wrong, and different. Regardless of what kind of neighbors they were, he knew his neighbors. Here's a man that would come and help his neighbors. That's a good example. That's a good example for us to get to know our neighbors so that we can invest our time in our neighbors, that we can minister to our neighbors, that the love that we have for ourselves, that we can lavish that same love upon our neighbors. If we can love our neighbors, what are we actually doing? If we can love our neighbors like we love ourselves, then Paul says we're actually fulfilling the law. The intent of the law, when you go back to the 10 Commandments and you look at the second half, which would be the last 6, right? If we actually love our neighbors, then we're doing all those 6, aren't we? He gives a few right here. So think about it this way in verse 9. If I'm loving my neighbor as myself, then we're not committing adultery, are we? No. Don't want anybody doing that to me, right? And if we're loving, then we won't do that. If I'm loving my neighbor, will we murder our neighbor? No. Might want to wring their neck from time to time. We're not going to murder anybody if we actually love our neighbor. Are we stealing from our neighbor if we're loving them like ourselves? No, we don't like to be stole from. Right? If I'm loving my neighbor as myself, am I saying false things about my neighbor? No. If I'm loving my neighbor as myself, am I coveting what they have? No. And you can put anything in there you would like. He says if there's any other commandment that he's given, just insert it here and ask yourself, if I'm actually loving my neighbor as myself, then I'm not doing that. And that's a good thing. That's a great thing. It's a wondrous thing. It's actually fulfilling the intent of the law that he gave. The intent of the law was just not to smack your hand and show you, well, it does show us how bad we are and how much we need grace. But once again, the intent of the law was so that neighbors would be good neighbors, that they would demonstrate love towards one another. So if we're loving our neighbors as ourselves, then we don't have to worry about transgressing these commandments at all. And once again, it's not a new command. I got to thinking about this. All of us probably know 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Everybody calls it the love chapter, right? But do you know how relational this is to our neighbors? 1 Corinthians 13, when you pick it up in verse 4, it describes what love looks like. And it's a love that is described that we should be exercising towards our neighbor. And I know all of us at this point, we're thinking about neighbors in the neighborhood, and we're probably thinking about the one guy or the one lady that drives us nuts. But what does it say? 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4, love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It's not arrogant. Love does not behave rudely, doesn't seek its own, is not provoked. Love thinks no evil, doesn't rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. If we're loving in this manner towards our neighbor, then we're actually fulfilling the law of God, aren't we? Let me ask you the question. Can you love your neighbor as yourself? Well, let me tell you this. Well, let me ask you another question. Do you have the capacity to love your neighbor as yourself? Do you have that capacity? See, this is a tricky question that I'm giving to you. If you and I actually love God, like we say we do, then He has given all those who love Him the capacity then to love their neighbors as themselves. If we say, no, I cannot love my neighbor as myself, I cannot, I will not, then that's an immediate red flag, and we gotta examine the nature of our relationship with God, don't we? Because the reality is, if we love God, the love of God is in us, and then we can do what it is that He says He tells us to do. We possess that. What I want us to understand is when He says, love your neighbor as yourself, and you're asking yourself, can I do it? My response to you is, yes, you can. He's given you all the resources you need to do that very thing. Matter of fact, His Spirit dwells in you, helping you to do that very thing, to love that neighbor. Now, most of us, what do? Well, I want to listen to my heart. I'm here to tell you this morning, don't listen to your heart. I know all the songs that are sung about listening to your heart, all the mantra that goes on in dating, listen to your heart and blah, 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 blah. Don't listen to your heart. Because if you listen to your heart, what are you waiting for? You're waiting for the feelings to come right on in, right? Pastor, I'll love my neighbor when I start and get the woozy feelings about loving him. But until I get the feelings about loving my neighbor, I'm not doing it. So I'm telling you, don't listen to your heart and don't wait for the fuzzies, because it may not come. This is what I'm going to tell you, is the old Nike commercial, just do it. Because that's what it is. You and I, as believers in Christ, have to make a deliberate choice, an act of the will to love the unlovable neighbor, don't you? You just have to get it in your head. You have to pray about it. You have to say, you know what? If Jesus loved me, then guess what? Now I'm going to go and I'm going to love that neighbor. He ain't going to like it, but I'm going to do it anyhow. I'm going to check in on them. I'm going to see if they have any needs. I might mow his yard from time to time, even though he's going to come out and complain because it ain't straight after I did mow it. But you know what? I'm going to love that man. Or if you're as a lady, I'm going to love that lady next door who's always talking. Talk, 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 talk. Whatever it is. Make a definitive choice that I am going to love that individual the same way that I love myself. And let me tell you, I love myself. So I'm going to love them. Why even do that? You might say, well, it says here it's a command. It is a command. And we do it out of obedience. But why else would you do that? Because generally, if we're having to make an act of the will to go love our neighbor, it means our neighbors are what we would categorize as the unlikables, the unlovables, the drive me nuts crowd. And most likely, they probably don't know Christ. How are they ever going to know the love of Christ if we withdraw the love that we are obligated to show them? Because as we started this conversation, it's a debt you owe. You owe your neighbor to love them. When I don't pay the debt to love my neighbor, I am withdrawing, right? I am withdrawing from that which they need and should be paid. So this loving your neighbor, it's a cause for us to reflect and to really think about the relations that we have in our neighborhoods. And once again, we're thinking neighbor here as neighborhoods, but it's much, much bigger than that. Neighbor is anybody that you really encounter. That's a neighbor. I mean, the Samaritan just happened upon the guy and did what he did. And Jesus says, who was a neighbor to that guy? The Samaritan was. The Jew wasn't. So what I'm saying is it's just not your neighborhood. It's a good place to start. Your neighborhood, your town, your village, your city, people in this nation, people outside this nation. Those are your neighbors. And we have a debt to them, to love them like we love ourselves, which hopefully is the demonstration of the love of Christ. Okay, let's pray.